Sarah stared at her phone screen, watching the group chat messages flood in about weekend plans that didn't include her. 3 months ago, she would have felt the familiar sting of rejection, the hollow ache of being overlooked. Today, she simply turned off her phone and smiled. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It began the day she realized she was exhausting herself trying to fit into spaces that were never meant for her. She had been the friend who always said yes, who bent herself into impossible shapes to maintain relationships that drained more than they gave. She had confused being needed with being valued, and it nearly broke her. The breaking point, the moment of clarity, came during what was supposed to be her birthday celebration. She had organized everything herself: the restaurant, the invitations, even the decorations. She had spent weeks coordinating schedules, sending gentle reminders, and building excitement for what she hoped would be a memorable evening with her closest friends. As she sat at the head of an empty table, watching the candle she had brought flicker in the dim restaurant lighting, her phone buzzed with familiar excuses. Traffic is crazy. Running 30 minutes late, followed by something came up with work. Rain check? And finally, the crushing "I'm so sorry. Forgot I had plans with my boyfriend tonight." Each message felt like a small betrayal, but it was the pattern that truly stung. This wasn't the first time she had been an afterthought in her own life. She realized she had been the friend who always accommodated everyone else's schedule, who rearranged her plans to fit into theirs, who said yes when she meant no and smiled when she felt hurt. The waiter approached with gentle concern, asking if she was still waiting for her party. In that moment, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. "No," she said clearly, "I'm dining alone tonight." She wasn't going to chase people who clearly didn't value her presence, and she wasn't going to diminish herself any longer. That night, Sarah ate her birthday dinner alone for the first time in years, and something remarkable happened. She enjoyed it. Without the pressure of entertaining others or managing social dynamics, she could actually taste her food, savor the carefully prepared dishes, notice the restaurant's warm ambience, and most importantly, listen to her own thoughts. She found herself having an internal conversation that had been drowned out by years of external noise. She ordered dessert, something she never did in group settings because she was always conscious of how it looked, and celebrated herself in a way that felt more genuine than any forced group celebration ever had. As she walked home under the streetlights, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in years, a sense of wholeness that didn't depend on anyone else's presence. The journey inward, the weeks that followed, were a revelation that unfolded slowly, like watching a sunrise. Sarah discovered that solitude wasn't the punishment she had always feared, it was a gift she had been denying herself for years. She started taking morning walks without the compulsive need to check her messages or fill the silence with podcasts or phone calls. Instead, she let her mind wander, noticing the way morning light filtered through the trees, the sound of her footsteps on different surfaces, the rhythm of her own breathing. These walks became sacred time, a daily appointment with herself that she began to protect fiercely. She visited museums on weekday afternoons when they were quiet and uncrowded, moving at her own pace and lingering at exhibits that spoke to her soul. She discovered she had opinions about art that had nothing to do with what was trendy or what her friends might appreciate. She found herself drawn to certain colors, moved by specific brushstrokes, fascinated by historical periods she had never explored. Sarah began to rediscover hobbies she had abandoned in her quest to fit into other people's interests. She dusted off her old easel and started painting again, creating pieces that were purely for her own joy rather than for social media approval. She returned to reading real, physical books, curling up in her favorite chair on Sunday afternoons and losing herself in stories that expanded her world rather than shrinking it to fit others' expectations. For the first time in years, she began to hear her own voice clearly. It was quieter than the external chatter she had grown accustomed to, but it was steady and authentic. She realized she had been living according to other people's definitions of success, happiness, and worth. She had been so busy maintaining friendships that she had forgotten to maintain her relationship with herself, the most important relationship she would ever have. In this space of self-discovery, Sarah began to understand her own patterns. She noticed how she had been seeking validation in texts that went unanswered, how she had been giving more than she received, how she had been molding herself to fit spaces that were never meant for her authentic self. This awareness wasn't accompanied by bitterness, but by a profound sense of relief. She was finally coming home to herself, building inner strength. As Sarah embraced her solitude, she discovered reservoirs of strength she never knew existed. The first test came when her car broke down on a rainy Tuesday morning. In the past, her immediate response would have been panic followed by frantically calling friends for help, apologizing for the inconvenience, and feeling helpless until someone rescued her. This time was different. Instead of reaching for her phone to call for rescue, Sarah took a deep breath and accessed a calm she hadn't known she possessed. She researched mechanics in her area, read reviews, called several shops to compare prices and availability. She negotiated repairs with confidence, asked questions until she understood the problem, and arranged for a rental car without feeling like she was imposing on anyone. When the mechanic tried to upsell her on unnecessary services, she politely but firmly declined. She trusted her own judgment, did her research, and made decisions that aligned with her budget and needs. The entire experience, which would have once left her feeling helpless and dependent, instead filled her with a quiet pride. She had handled a stressful situation entirely on her own, and she had done it well. This pattern repeated itself in various aspects of her life. When work became stressful and politics at the office grew toxic, Sarah didn't seek validation from others or get caught up in the gossip mill. Instead, she assessed the situation objectively, trusted her own judgment about what was professional and ethical, and made decisions that preserved her integrity. She started speaking up in meetings when she had valuable input, not because she wanted to be heard, but because she had something worth saying. Each challenge she faced alone made her more self-reliant and confident in her abilities. She learned to cook elaborate meals for one, not out of loneliness but out of self-love and the joy of creating something beautiful for herself. She started a small herb garden on her balcony, nurturing plants with the same patience and care she was learning to give herself. She took up photography, capturing moments of beauty that existed whether or not anyone else witnessed them: sunrises over the city, the way rain created patterns on her window, the satisfied expression of her neighbor's cat sunbathing. Sarah began to realize that her strength had always been there, waiting beneath the surface. Years of constantly seeking external validation had simply covered it up. Now, in solitude, that strength was finally free to emerge and flourish. She was becoming someone she actually liked, someone whose company she enjoyed, whose opinions she respected, whose judgment she trusted. The quality revolution. Sarah's approach to relationships fundamentally shifted as she learned to value her own company. She stopped collecting acquaintances like trophies and started investing in connections that truly mattered. The shift wasn't immediate, it required unlearning years of people-pleasing behavior and the deep-seated belief that being busy socially meant being valuable as a person. When old friends reached out with last-minute invitations or requests for favors, Sarah no longer felt obligated to say yes to every invitation or drop everything to accommodate others' needs. She started asking herself important questions before committing. Does this align with my values? Will this energize or drain me? Am I saying yes out of genuine interest or out of fear of disappointing someone? This new discernment wasn't about becoming selfish or unkind, it was about honoring her own time and energy as precious resources. She began to understand that saying yes to everything meant saying no to the things that truly mattered to her, including her own well-being and growth. She met Elena at a pottery class, a small, intimate workshop that Sarah had signed up for purely because she was curious about working with clay. Elena was another woman who valued deep conversation over small talk, who listened more than she spoke, who seemed comfortable with contemplative silences. Their friendship grew slowly and organically, built on mutual respect and genuine interest in each other's thoughts and experiences rather than convenience or social obligation. Their conversations ranged from philosophy to personal struggles, from creative aspirations to life lessons learned through experience. Elena never tried to fix Sarah's problems or offer unsolicited advice, she simply listened with the kind of presence that made Sarah feel truly seen and understood. In return, Sarah found herself capable of offering the same quality of attention and support. Sarah discovered that having one genuine friend was infinitely more fulfilling than maintaining a dozen superficial relationships that required constant performance and emotional labor. With Elena, she could be completely authentic, sharing her fears, celebrating her victories, exploring ideas without judgment, and simply enjoying comfortable companionship without the exhausting work of trying to be someone she wasn't. This quality over quantity approach extended beyond friendships to all areas of her life. She became more selective about how she spent her time, choosing activities and commitments that aligned with her values and contributed to her growth. She no longer felt the need to fill every weekend with social obligations or every evening with activities just to avoid being alone with herself. The authenticity awakening free from the need to perform for others. Sarah began living authentically for the first time in her adult life. The changes started small but rippled outward in ways that transformed not just how she looked, but how she moved through the world. She cut her hair short in a style that made her feel confident and comfortable, not because it was trendy or because she thought others would approve, but because she liked the way it framed her face and reflected her personality. She cleaned out her wardrobe, donating clothes she had bought to fit in with certain groups or to project an image that wasn't truly her. She kept pieces that made her feel like herself, comfortable, confident, and authentic. Her style became more coherent and personal, reflecting her actual preferences rather than what fashion magazines or her former social circles deemed acceptable. Sarah took a photography course instead of the networking events she used to force herself to attend, even though they had felt like obligations rather than opportunities. She took breaks from the hospital to walk outside, ate regular meals even when stress killed her appetite, and allowed herself moments of private grief without feeling guilty for having emotions. She had learned that taking care of herself wasn't selfish, it was essential for being able to care for others effectively. She realized that her journey of walking alone hadn't isolated her from meaningful connections, it had prepared her to show up authentically and powerfully in the relationships that truly mattered. She could support others from a place of strength rather than neediness, love without clinging, and be present without losing herself in other people's emotions or expectations. When her father finally came home from the hospital, weak but recovering, he took her hand and said something that moved her deeply. "I don't know what we would have done without you. You were like a rock for all of us." Sarah realized that her solitude hadn't made her cold or disconnected, it had made her genuinely strong and capable of being truly helpful when it mattered most. The phoenix rising a year and a half later, Sarah looked back on her journey with profound gratitude and a sense of awe at how completely her life had transformed. She had lost some friends along the way, relationships that couldn't survive her refusal to remain small and accommodating, but she had gained something far more valuable than social approval. She had gained herself. The woman who had once sat alone at her birthday dinner, feeling abandoned and worthless, had been transformed into someone who chose solitude as a sacred practice rather than enduring it as a punishment. She had learned the profound difference between being alone and being lonely, discovering that solitude could be a sanctuary of peace and self-discovery rather than a prison of isolation. Sarah's apartment had become a reflection of her authentic self, filled with books she actually wanted to read, art that moved her soul, plants she nurtured with patience, and photographs she had taken during her solo adventures. Every object in her space had meaning and brought her joy, rather than serving as props in a life performed for others' approval. Her work life had transformed as well. No longer afraid to speak up or stand out, Sarah had been promoted twice in 18 months. Her colleagues respected her opinions because she offered them thoughtfully and authentically. She had discovered leadership qualities she never knew she possessed, becoming someone others looked to for guidance not because she demanded attention, but because she had cultivated genuine wisdom and confidence. The quality of her relationships had improved dramatically. Elena had become not just a friend but a chosen sister, someone with whom Sarah could share her deepest thoughts and most vulnerable moments. She had also attracted other authentic people into her orbit, individuals who appreciated depth and genuine connection over superficial socializing. Her social circle was smaller but infinitely richer. Most importantly, Sarah had developed an unshakable relationship with herself. She had become her own best friend, her own source of comfort in difficult times, her own cheerleader in moments of triumph, and her own compass when facing difficult decisions. She no longer needed external validation to feel worthy or successful. Her self-worth was an internal flame that burned steadily regardless of external circumstances. Sarah now understood that her worth wasn't determined by how many people surrounded her or how busy her social calendar was, but by the depth and authenticity of her relationship with herself. She had become someone she genuinely liked and respected, someone whose company she enjoyed, whose judgment she trusted, whose dreams she supported with fierce dedication. Like a phoenix rising from the ashes of her former people-pleasing self, Sarah had emerged as someone who was whole, authentic, and unshakable. She had learned that transformation often requires destruction, the destruction of false selves, limiting beliefs, and relationships that no longer served her growth. From those ashes had risen a woman who knew her own power and wasn't afraid to use it. The message Sarah's story reminds us that sometimes the most courageous thing we can do is stand alone, not out of defiance or bitterness, but out of a deep commitment to our own growth and authenticity. In a world that constantly tells us we need others to complete us, that our worth is measured by our social connections and our ability to fit in, there is profound power in discovering that we are already whole. The journey of walking alone isn't about rejecting connection or becoming antisocial, it's about learning to connect from a place of strength, wholeness, and authenticity rather than desperation, neediness, or fear. When we are comfortable with ourselves, when we know our own worth independent of external validation, we become capable of forming deeper, more meaningful relationships because we're not trying to extract our sense of self from other people. Society often portrays solitude as something to be feared, avoided, or cured, We're taught that being alone means being lonely, that independence means isolation, that self-sufficiency means selfishness. Sarah's journey proves these assumptions wrong. Her solitude became a classroom where she learned self-love. Her independence became a foundation for authentic relationships. Her self-sufficiency became a gift she could offer to others. When we stop seeking our worth in the approval of others, we begin to understand our true value, a value that exists independent of external circumstances, relationships, or social status. When we stop fearing solitude, we discover that it's not empty space to be filled with distractions, but sacred ground where our authentic selves can finally flourish without the need to perform or conform. The path of independence requires courage because it goes against many of our cultural messages and social conditioning. It requires us to face our fears of abandonment, our deep-seated beliefs about our own worthiness, and our addiction to external validation. But this path leads to a destination that no amount of external approval can provide: genuine self-love, unshakable confidence, and the kind of inner peace that no one can take away. Sarah's transformation teaches us that we don't need to wait for others to validate our worth, support our dreams, or give us permission to live authentically. We have everything we need within ourselves to create a life of meaning, purpose, and joy. Our solitude isn't a sentence to be endured, it's a sanctuary to be treasured. Our independence isn't isolation, it's liberation from the exhausting work of trying to be someone we're not. Like Sarah, you have everything within you to not just survive alone, but to thrive in your own company. Your solitude can become your superpower, your independence your greatest strength, and your journey of walking alone not a punishment, but the path to discovering the magnificent, whole, and worthy person you were always meant to be. The phoenix doesn't rise because it has to, it rises because it knows its own power, and so can you.